Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is the second part of a two-part series. My name is Steve Fisher, and I'm the Training Operations Manager here at the USCCA. Let me also begin by introducing the USCCA's top senior training counselor and the author of Women's Handgun and Self-Defense Fundamentals, Beth Alcazar. Hi, Beth.
Hi, thanks, Steve. Good to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here with us. Next, I would like to introduce the author of the USCCA's Concealed Carry and Home Defense Fundamentals. He also authored Emergency First Aid Fundamentals and Countering the Mass Shooter Threat, Michael Martin. Now, Michael also happens to be a firefighter and a paramedic, and this will figure into our discussion today. Michael, how you doing?
I am great, Steve. How you doing? Hi, Beth.
Well, let me welcome all of you then that is watching this presentation. We have members of the USCCA here with us, as well as many of you who may not know us so well. Now, in part one, we discussed how to conduct a home defense evaluation and also what makes up a home defense plan. In part two, our topics are going to include, other than firearms, what defensive tools should be included in a plan, different options for home defense firearms, and also how does training for home defense differ than concealed carry in public. Now, let me read some of these topics for you. We're going to actually talk about storage and staging devices, safes, hidden devices. Michael will talk a little bit about emergency first aid and trauma kits, and what else, when we get there, you'll know what else. Now, Beth, let's have you start off with storage.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So storage and staging are different terms, but both very, very important terms. And let's kind of focus in on storage right now and make sure we understand the definition of that. That's really when you do not need to get to your firearm right away. So you don't need immediate access. Maybe it's a hunting gun. Maybe it's a collectible piece. It's something that you don't need to use in the foreseeable future. So it's something you want to maintain and clean and put away. So for this, of course, one of the most, common choices would be your traditional safe. Now, granted, a lot of these safes are very large, very cumbersome. They take up a lot of space in the home. But the good thing is they hold a lot of firearms. I know Michael and Steve, you probably both have these traditional types of safes in your home. Is that correct?
Right. So I've got one. It's about 700 pounds, which, I realize that's not going to walk out with the typical home burglar. And you're exactly right. That's where I store the guns that have been cleaned and they're put away. So the boys are both on their clay target team for their school. Once those guns are put away for the season, they're clean, locked up in there, and I wouldn't expect to get access to that quickly. In fact, I usually have to look up the secret code where I have the combination because it's not something I always remember to get into that big safe.
Yeah, and if you
All
don't have
right.
a traditional safe, though, Steve, I know you do too, though, right? You have traditional safes in your home.
Yeah, I have a couple of them. And the reason I have two is
Yeah.
because my wife wouldn't let me get the big one that I wanted. So I needed all that space. I needed to get two safes.
Well,
Yeah, it
luckily,
sounds
there's a
good.
lot of makes and models and types, and you can certainly go for the big one or the small one. The reason why a lot of people choose them, of course, is because the capacity. You're going to have a lot of things that fit in there. A lot of times, it's going to be theft proof, like Michael mentioned, fireproof up to usually a certain amount of temperature degrees and for a certain amount of time. So, of course, very handy to have in the home. If that's something too big or maybe out of the budget, there are other options, and I like to call these the smart safe options. And for me, I'm a Trekkie. I really do enjoy technology and innovation, so it's kind of fun to have these things in your home. One that I happen to have and I really like is called the Hornady Rapid Safe. Now, this stands for the radio frequency ID safe. There's different kinds that use some different technologies. This one happens to work with a band that I can pop right here in front. Now, I'm going to go ahead and actually turn it on and engage it. But if I pop it right here, that little wristband basically gives me hands-free immediate access into the safe where I could have my handgun very accessible to me. Michael, I think you have something maybe similar, but it's for an AR-15. Is that correct?
Yep. That's exactly right. So in addition to the big safe, I've got a small handgun safe like you, but I have a wall-mounted safe. And when you think of a wall-mounted safe, you might think of something big and gigantic. It's from a company called Shotlock, and it's a very unique way of securing a home defense shotgun or firearm. So this mounts on the wall. The only part of the gun that's actually contained in the shot lock is the receiver, so the area that would include the trigger and the trigger guard. So the safe opens with push buttons on the front, and it has a key backup, of course. But the great thing about this style of safe is it's small. The gun itself is small, so the safe shouldn't be gigantic. So I can have this in an area like in a closet, behind clothing. I push the clothing aside. There my AR-15 is mounted to the wall. The other good thing about it is it's mounted to the wall with these big, gigantic lag bolts that mount right into the studs of the wall. So unless a burglar comes with heavy tools, they're not going to walk away with that thing. But I can still get access to it very, very quickly. In fact, I think, Joe, we've got that on slide 11, if you can show a picture of that. But the safe that I've kind of got my eye on is made by the same company that you just showed, Beth. It's made by Hornady. It's actually called the Rapid Safe. So it's similar to the shot lock safe. And Joe, I think that's on our next slide if you want to bring that up. So the nice thing about this safe is it's opened with a wristband, like you just demonstrated, Beth. So like the safe you showed and the wall-mounted safe, you can actually have up to 5 wristbands. So in my household, Sarah and I could both have a wristband. We walk up to the safe, we tap that bracelet on the safe, it pops open, and we immediately have access to the AR-15, and no combinations to memorize at all.
Yeah, that's what's really handy about these things. It's hands-free, and you can use a key fob, a keychain kind of thing, the bracelet like I demonstrated earlier. They also open more traditional ways, of course, with a key if you needed to get into it for any other reason. But there's also something we call the biometric safe, which doesn't need a password. It doesn't need any kind of key fob or bracelet. It pretty much just needs a fingerprint. And Steve, I think you have one of those to show us. And you also have a pretty intense story.
I have a fingerprint, and everybody does, and they're unique to us, right? So these biometric safes, which are pretty cool, I've got one here. Actually, this is the one that I have at my home. So this biometric safe, if you push a little button here, okay, it activates these lights on the safe. Can you see that? Okay, so once I push that button, I put my finger right here, and voila, the safe opens up. So it's very simple. What makes it simple is the fact that you program your fingerprint into that safe. I can program 4 different fingerprints into that safe, and all of my family members have those fingerprints programmed into it. Now, that story that you were talking about, my wife has a very good friend who had a history of domestic violence. Her ex-husband was very brutal to her, and he had threatened her life after their divorce. What had occurred is that he had broken into the house, and she executed her plan, which was to evade and barricade herself in her room. And she did that, and then she tried to get her gun that was in a safe that had a 3-digit combination. She couldn't remember the combination. She was so stressed out from her husband or ex-husband smashing on the door. So then she went to the next option, which was to secure the key for that safe. And she fumbled around with the key, and the door broke in, and he was on top of her and then proceeded to beat her some more. Fortunately, she survived the attack, and she learned a lesson. That safe didn't work for her, but that biometric safe, which she's now put throughout her whole house, it is something that is a lot easier for her to be able to access under a very stressful situation.
Oh my goodness. I think that's what's really good about safes nowadays. Luckily, there are lots of different kinds of options for you, your family, your lifestyle, and of course, definitely to consider, what are you going to be capable of doing under that stressful scenario? So, Steve, another option that could have been maybe something your friend might have used is something I like to call the hidden in plain sight types of options. Joe, if you bring up image 12, this just shows one piece of furniture, actually. This is a shelf unit that kind of has that hidden compartment where you can store and stage different firearms. These also are available in all sorts of things. I've seen bookshelves, tables, mirrors, grandfather clocks. So there's a lot of different kinds of things that might be an option for someone, including what I have right here. This looks like your average everyday garment bag, doesn't it? I mean, wow, that's amazing, right, Beth? But what's cool about this is it's a very heavy duty material. And if you get into your garment bag here, you'll actually see there's a lot of storage area to hold long guns, and your regular handguns. You could also hold ammunition, passports, money. Under circumstances, this could be one of those kind of bug out bags or your get home bag. And I mean, it's so innocuous looking. It's so boring. It's really just something that would be hanging in your closet that people wouldn't
So,
notice.
so it's not a garment bag. It just looks like one.
It just looks like one. And this is called the HTF tactical bag from Skinner Sights. But there are so many really great hidden in plain view options out there. And that kind of leads to this discussion on staging. You know, it's not just about storage for firearms you don't get or don't need or are just putting away for whatever time frame. We need to consider those firearms that we need immediately, like in the instance of your friend Steve. We have to think about the guns that would be used for home protection, for family protection, for personal protection. And one thing we just want to point out is that if you are staging a gun, make sure, for example, in that safe that either Steve or I were showing earlier, if you've got a handgun in there and you've got it loaded and around chambered, we want to make sure that you also have some kind of a trigger guard or holster that is basically keeping you from making a terrible mistake. Should you pop open that safe and grab that firearm, you're very likely to curl that finger in, especially under stress, and press off around. So we want to make sure that the trigger guard is protected by that guard or holster. The other option would be you can basically put your firearm in the safe unloaded, slide lock to the rear, full magazine. As soon as that safe pops open, load the magazine, rack that round right in, and you'll be ready to go. So lots of things to consider there mentally as you prepare to stage your firearms. And speaking of things to consider, Michael, I know that there's a lot of state and federal laws and repercussions and other things that we need to also bring to mind as well.
Right. Yep. So great point. Some of the things that we're talking about in terms of staging might make sense for one household. For example, Steve's household that has just adults in it and even adult children that would come into the home. My home's a little different. I've got a 13 and a 16-year-old at home, and Beth, I know you've got two children at home as well. So state law and federal law is going to fall into place here when it comes to how we're deciding to store guns. In fact, federal law says that we can't allow a minor to gain access to a loaded firearm. And Beth, you and I have commented back and forth that this innocuous phrase of that a child could have gained access is in the eye of the beholder, right? And that really means the police officer who might be on scene and the prosecutor. It doesn't mean a child had to have gained access, but only that they could have gained access. So the penalties for having a child potentially get access to a loaded gun are steep. Most state laws are going to have that be as steep as a gross misdemeanor or even a felony. In fact, you have talked about some of the new laws that have come out that fall under a new name.
Yeah, this is actually kind of new legislation. The CAP laws, or the Child Access Prevention laws. A lot of people refer to these as mandatory storage laws. And just like you're saying, Michael, these are kind of nitpicky, really, because the strictest laws can impose criminal liability where a minor could or might be likely to gain access to the gun. They don't even have to gain access. So you really have to pay attention to what's going on in your area to make sure that you're following the rules and keeping yourself safe legally and financially, not just physically safe.
Yeah, well, that's all great information, you guys. Now, here's one thing that I recommend to anybody that asks or cares to listen to me. The most dependable place that I found for staging a defensive weapon, it's on my body. I carry concealed outside of the house, and I also carry concealed inside of the house. So I always know where my firearm is at all times, and I can get to it without having to worry about running to or getting to wherever I've got it placed without the house. Now, that is a very good thing to do, but it's also a very good thing to do to have those weapons stored and safely staged throughout your house as well. So let me transition now, Michael, to another thing that we need to have inside our house when it comes to being prepared for a home invasion. Michael, you're a paramedic, okay? So, and such a smart man when it comes to emergency first aid that we're going to refer to you right now. Tell us a little bit about the importance of being able to provide immediate first aid. Go ahead.
You bet. So I realized on part one, I kind of sounded like a broken record when I kept referring to calling 911 as being step number one of any home defense plan. And I sound like a broken record when it comes to talking about people being prepared to protect the life of a loved one if that loved one is severely injured, including a gunshot injury or stabbing. Now, the cool thing about this, Steve and Beth, is that the skills required to save someone's life if they're shot are not paramedic level skills. They're not emergency surgeon level skills to save their life for the first 4 or 5 minutes. It's Boy Scout level skills. So the kind of things we learned back at Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts are going to protect their life. Now, a trauma kit is very different than the kind of kit you might find at a sporting goods store or a supply store. Those kind of kits contain a lot of extraneous products you don't need, a lot of cheap products, probably a cheaper tourniquet, and a whole bunch of Band-Aids you're never going to use. A trauma kit, or what we call an IFAC, which stands for an individual first aid kit, will save someone's life if they have a traumatic injury. Now, the good news is they've only got about 4 items in it, maybe a couple extra items if someone does have some advanced training. So I bet you guys can guess what item number one is. It's a good tourniquet. This is a tourniquet called a CAT tourniquet that stands for a Combat Application Tourniquet. This is the one selected by the U.S. military, so of course it's the one selected by most EMS agencies and most police departments. The second item that would go into a kit is called an emergency compression bandage. Again, the one selected by the military. So millions of people are familiar with these. This has an elasticized bandage over a gauze pad, and that elastic bandage helps put a lot of pressure on a severe injury. The next item is maybe something people wouldn't be familiar with. They are chest seals. If someone is shot in the torso and air is leaking into the chest cavity, air is going the wrong way, and that lung can collapse, and that can very quickly turn into what we call a pneumothorax, and it could cause the death of the person. So these are sticky pads. You peel off a sticky backing, stick it right over the hole. Now, this actually comes with 2 chest seals. Beth and Steve, can you guess why there's 2 instead of just 1?
Yeah, entrance and exit wounds.
Entrance and exit
Right.
wounds. Of course, you might get a couple gunshot injuries, but if you get one, you want to be careful to care for the front and the back injury, the entry and the exit wound. The next thing we'll add is what we call a hemostatic dressing. Now, my favorites are from a company called Quick Clot. They're produced by a company called Z Medica. So Quick Clot is selected by the military as well. This has a hemostatic agent on it that if it's packed into a junctional injury, so for example, the junctional injury would be at the armpit or the groin area, you can't put a tourniquet in those areas, but you can pack it with this hemostatic dressing. And that's it. That's the only thing that goes into an IFAC. If you've got space for a couple more things, I love this product. It's called SWAT-T. It stands for Stretch, Wrap, and Tuck. It's nothing more elaborate than a long sheet of rubber. If you stretch it and wrap it around an injured limb, it provides tourniquet level compression, and you can actually make a compression bandage in a pinch. Now, I carry those products in a couple different tools. My favorite is from a company called North American Rescue. This is called the MFAC Mini. It's got everything in there we just talked about. So on the left side, it's got a tourniquet, and under that is a chest seal. On the right side, it's got my hemostatic dressing, and under that, it's got my emergency bandage. Now, I've got a couple extra things here. That thing that looks like a pen, that's actually a needle I can use to decompress someone's chest if they are indeed developing a pneumothorax. And then this little green thing here, Steve, that's to insert in someone's nose if I'm concerned about maintaining their airway. So if we were in the same studio together, I'd ask you to volunteer for that, but maybe next time. And then one other kind of really a unique IFAC is an ankle IFAC. So this could be wrapped around your ankle so you don't have a bunch of extra stuff on your belt. This one, in addition to having all those products, also has a trauma shear that's incredibly important. We always tell our EMT students and new paramedics the very first thing you want to do with a trauma victim is get them trauma naked. That means cut their clothing off, find out where the injuries are, and go to it with the rest of the products you've got. Incredibly important to learn how to use those tools. In the case of severe bleeding, we've got about 4 to 5 minutes to save that person's life. So kind of like that phone call to 911, every minute you delay means the clock is ticking. So even a delay of 60 seconds literally could mean the difference between life and death.
Yep.
Yeah,
Hey,
that's
Beth.
all such good information and good stuff to keep with you. And sorry, Steve, I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't want to overlook the fact that there's a very simple tool that everybody out there could have that's very, very important as well. And that is a flashlight. I know, right? Ooh, amazing. But if you have a good tactical flashlight, I've got several here, lots of different sizes, several here from Streamlight. I like this one because it's on a lanyard. I can actually wear that everywhere I go. But look, you got to find a good one. Don't get the cheapy kind that just lay around the house. Those probably only have, maybe even 90 lumens at best, and that's not going to be bright enough. You need something that's heavy duty, that has also a heavy duty light bulb as well, so that that doesn't shatter if you happen to I don't know, hit somebody with it or drop it, whatever the case may be. But people are arguing about anywhere from 120 to maybe even upwards of 300 lumens minimum. I don't care what you choose something. It's great for emergencies. You can use it with or without a firearm. And as I mentioned, for a last ditch effort, you could potentially use that as a weapon itself. So have a good
Yeah,
flashlight, a good tactical
if,
flashlight.
if it's big enough, you can hit him with it. And
Yeah,
one important point: flashlights, a bright enough flashlight works day or night, doesn't it? You can blind somebody
correct.
with it day or
That's
night.
right.
So talk about kind of segues into being able to adapt and improvise and overcome those situations. So if you don't have a firearm handy, if you don't have a flashlight handy, there's other things that you can have throughout your house. You could put them there if they're not there already. I played baseball. You may not be able to tell right now from looking at me, but I was a pretty good baseball player. I have baseball bats in my house in strategic positions that can be used by myself or any of my family members to ward off an attacker. There's all kinds of things you can get in. If you're in the kitchen, you can use a knife. Beth, I know that you've got some
Yeah,
things that you and Sean have placed throughout your house.
it it's such a simple concept, but really this options based weapons of opportunity kind of idea is really significant, whether it's something by your bedside like the bouquets we used to use for aikido, or whether it's a strategically placed candle holder or some object of some kind. I mean, don't be afraid to have those. We've got those strategically placed throughout our home, and that's something I learned from the Alice Institute. It's just options based, whatever you can use to maybe distract an attacker, or get them off their focus and their concentration, so you can do what you need to do to defend your life and your family. And that's the awesome thing about this discussion. This is not just for the gun owner. It's not just for the 2A community. This is for everyone who wants to know how to better protect themselves and their loved ones. And by taking these precautions and by planning and being prepared, they're going to be able to keep their families safe.
Beth and Michael, great information so far. That guides us into the next topic. So, how about if we discuss the different options for home defense? Handguns, shotguns, AR-15s, etc. Now, those considerations that we're going to talk to you guys about right now, you live in a house or an apartment? Do you have tight quarters or is it roomy? Are you in an urban neighborhood with close people, close neighbors? Or are you rurally located and you're kind of isolated? As a user, are you strong, physically strong, or are you not so strong? And are you experienced in using a firearm or not experienced? So we're going to go through all this type of stuff and then discuss the simple pros and cons of each. So let's begin with Michael.
All right, I'll take it. Steve, when we evaluate these different kind of firearms, we'll try to categorize them back to the different characteristics you talked about, where people live, how big they are, what their experience is. So how about if we start with shotguns? Because when people think about home defense, that's probably the thing they think about. So shotguns do make a lot of sense for home defense, but it's not because you can't miss with a shotgun. So if your Uncle Frank is telling you, buy a shotgun because you can't miss, he's wrong. In fact, if you think about the longest distance in most houses, let's describe a 15-foot long hallway. A shotgun blast fired down that hallway at 15 feet is going to make a hole about as big as a baseball. So that requires deliberate aiming. So if you're shooting from the hip or you think you can't miss, tragedy might result, and you're certainly not going to hit the bad guy. So the reason shotguns do have a lot of favoritism towards a home defense gun is because of the load they deliver. So when we talk about shotgun cartridges, they're categorized by a shot number. So shot number 12 is pretty small. It measures 0.05 inches in diameter. It goes all the way up through what's called triple aught. That's 3 zeros in a row. That measures 0.36 inches in diameter. So that's 36 caliber. So for home defense, our recommendation is really anything from number 6 on up. But my recommendation is a double aught buckshot. In fact, I think Steve, you've got a see-through image. In fact, Joe, I'm going to have you bring up image 13. That shows the shotgun shell that Steve's got. So this is double aught, and this actually has 8 pellets in a 1 ounce load, which means that those projectiles, which aren't much smaller than a 9mm handgun, deliver those 8 pellets all at once. So that's enormous stopping power. So here's a 9mm round for a handgun. That's the double aught shell. This fires about 8 pellets that are not much smaller than this in diameter. So again, quite a bit of stopping power. So really, any shotgun can work for home defense, including your granddad's old gun. In fact, Steve and Beth, I have got my father's old gun here. It is a Remington Model 11. So my dad was born in 1937, but this is a 1931 gun because, of course, when he was young, he couldn't afford a new gun, so he bought a used gun. So that gun is 89 years old. It's in perfect working condition. That could be used for home defense. It's as good today as it was back when it was picked off the shelf. Another shotgun I've got is a double barrel shotgun. So we'll talk about this and really the 3 types of shotguns that I think the 3 of us will share a little bit. So generally speaking, there's 3 types of shotguns: pump, semi-automatic, and double barrel. So Steve and Beth, I'll cover this one, and I'll ask you guys to cover your gun that you got. So as a double barrel, it's kind of obvious why it's got the name. It's got 2 barrels. When I load this up, I can open up the action. 2 shells get loaded right into the chambers, and when I close it up, it's ready to fire as soon as I take it off safe. So I get 2 shells with that, but incredibly reliable. Whether I'm missing grouse or defending the home, it's an incredibly reliable gun. So one of the 3 general types. We're going to go to you next, Beth. I think you've got one of your semi-automatic shotguns.
Yeah, absolutely. I have my Benelli M2, and I'm a lefty with long guns, so my designated safe area is going to be over here. But this is actually my competition shotgun. And what you'll notice about it, even though the barrel is a little bit shorter, it has an extended magazine tube there. So because I use this for competition especially, and I train with it that way for some fun, I can actually get 10 rounds in here. But it's semi-automatic, which means one press of that trigger is going to release that shot, and I don't have to do anything else to the firearm except for press the trigger again. And that's the beauty of this gorgeous semi-automatic shotgun.
And Steve, I think you've got a pump shotgun to show off.
Well, yeah, this is my trusty old Mossberg 500 tactical. So like Beth was showing before, and I have a magazine tube here, and if I load this up as full as I can get it, I'll get 6 rounds in here and then 1 in the chamber. So this is a pump. So what that means is that when the foregrip goes forward, I now have a round in the chamber. When I press the trigger and I want to get rid of the expended shell casing, I just pull the gun or the forearm back, and then I put it back and I load the next round. So the shotgun that I've got here, it's like I said, it's a very trusty old Mossberg 500 pump.
Great. So those are the 3 generally available kinds of guns: double barrel, semi-automatic, and pump. I did mention that any shotgun is up to the task, but if you are considering buying new, you might want to consider the 2 most popular guns for home defense, which is the one that Steve showed you, the Mossberg 500, or the Remington 870. Beth, I think you've got an 870 as well.
I do. This gorgeous piece was actually handed down to us from my father-in-law. And I mean, I just love it. I love the pump action. And I think it's a little bit bigger than what we would probably use for home defense. But hey, sometimes you use what you have.
Right. In fact, the 2 guns that Steve and Beth just showed, the Mossberg 500 and the Remington 870, they do come in both hunting or what are called tactical versions. And tactical doesn't mean you've got to be a police officer. The tactical nomenclature is really applied to versions of those guns that have shorter barrels, usually at around 18 to 20 inches. And the reason that's important is the shorter barrel helps keep the gun maneuverable and lightweight. So one other difference between traditional hunting shotguns and more tactical guns is that those tactical guns can be accessorized a little bit. A lot of them come with what are called Picatinny rails on the top, and you can add something called a ghost sight or even a red dot or a holographic scope. And I think, Steve, you've got the ghost sight on your Mossberg.
I do. I do. Here's the rear sight, and then here is the front sight, and you can talk to that a little bit, Michael. And I also, I can take that ghost sight off, and I can place this Picatinny rail on in place of the rear ghost sight, and you can mount an optic on there.
Perfect. So the way a ghost sight works is different than a set of dots that you would use if you're out hunting duck or grouse. Those dots aren't really meant to be used as aiming points and simply meant to ensure that you've got a good cheek weld. You've got a good position of your cheek on the stock itself. But that ghost sight is actually something that you look through. It's a fairly large circle. You look at your target, but you're looking at it through that ghost sight. The reason it's called a ghost sight is if you're focused on the target, the ghost ring itself is going to be slightly blurred, so you're seeing a ghosting of that sight. But it's very, very effective and not expensive at all. So how about if we do a quick summary of some of the pros and cons of selecting a shotgun as a home defense firearm? So Joe, I'll have you bring up the list. We built that's on chart 14. So we've got a few pros and cons. How about if I start out talking about that first pro? So one of my most important points I make if someone's considering a shotgun, that shotgun can deliver a larger load with each trigger press, which is as much as the equivalent of 8 to 9 pistol rounds. It doesn't mean that you can shoot from the hip or shoot without aiming. It still requires deliberate aiming, but every time you press that trigger, there's a higher probability of stopping a bad guy compared to a lot of the other firearms we're going to talk about. Steve, can I have you hit the next one?
Yeah, it's real simple. Familiarity. So many of us have grown up in a hunting family, and we're very familiar with shotguns because that's what our grandparents or our parents had used when they were out there bird hunting.
Yeah, and that's the way they used that shotgun as well. When they put it away at the end of the day, that also was their home defense gun. So, the tradition continues. So how about some cons here? Beth, do you want to hit that first one?
Yeah, I see this a lot, but the biggest con is probably just managing the recoil. For smaller statured folks, or maybe someone that's new to firearms, you stick a 12 gauge shotgun in their hand, that's intense. So that could be a deterrent for a lot of folks to be able to use it very effectively.
Yep, and one consideration would be to go with a smaller gauge, to go with potentially a 20 gauge, but even that's got a bigger recoil than some of the other guns we're gonna talk about. And I'll refer to the second con. These guns tend to have fewer rounds. Even the one that Beth had with the extended tube, that holds 10 rounds. Steve's has, I think, 7, Steve?
Yeah,
and
7.
My double barrel, of course. Yeah.
I have a side saddle that allows me to be able to have extra ammunition on the gun in case I need it. So there are, again, accessory items that help you to be a little bit more prepared for a longer fight.
Sure. And that looks pretty awesome too, Steve. So, and of course, on the shotgun I showed, the double barrel, well, that holds 2 rounds. And it doesn't mean you can't reload any of these things, but in a dynamic situation, the fewer times you have to reload, the better. And then, Steve, I think I'll have you hit that last con.
Yeah, well, yeah, even with a shorter barrel, it still makes it a little bit more difficult to move around inside of a house, especially if you have a house that is not that big and has tight quarters.
Yep. So, one of the ways to alleviate that concern is to get one of the tactical versions with a shorter barrel. The 2 guns I showed have a 29 and a 30-inch barrel, so that's a lot to maneuver around. Steve and Beth, anything you guys would add to the pro-con list?
I think that's good.
Nope. I think it's a good
right.
time for us to start talking about AR-15s, Michael, otherwise referred to as sporting rifles.
Yep. So one of my favorite rifles to own, one of my favorite rifles to go out and shoot. It's a rifle that tends to be able to be used by just about anybody. So the reason it's used by so many people, the reason it's loved by so many people, is it's light, maneuverable, and it's almost got no recoil whatsoever. And I know that's hard to believe if you've seen videos of people shooting other kinds of guns, but it's true. And I think Beth will maybe refer a little bit more to this. One of the other things I like about it is I have to reload less. On the range, I appreciate that. But in a defensive situation, I'm really going to appreciate this. This is a magazine from a company called Daniel Defense. This actually stores 32 rounds. 30 rounds is the more typical magazine size, but that's fewer times I have to reload than the shotguns that we just talked about. One of the other things that I love about it is that gun itself has got really good stopping power, although the rounds are designed to be very, very small and lightweight. They go very fast. So the benefit of what happens when it comes to home defense is if that bullet hits a wall, it very likely fragments and it stops moving. So if I'm firing a gun in my house, God forbid, to stop an attacker, that round will very likely not make it out through the wall. So very, very important thing to understand. But I guess the thing that I love most about the AR-15s is they are endlessly accessorizable, if that's a word. I can endlessly build on this, add to it, improve it. So I'll show a few of those to you in just a minute. But before we talk about some of the pros and cons and actually look at one of the guns, I want to maybe talk about the elephant in the room. We probably have some listeners that are amazed that we're talking about those evil black rifles, AR-15s. The media tends to demonize these. Beth, I think you've seen a very, very different viewpoint on how these guns are perceived in your classes. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me how the AR-15 is portrayed as this evil, black, horrible gun, this weapon of death and destruction, because I teach a lot of classes for new folks and especially a lot of classes that are full of women. And I like to bring my AR-15, which happens to be custom made just for me. It's not black, as you can see. It's actually kind of fun and got some cool elements to it. But we'll get this gun out and people are like, oh, what is that? I'm like, ooh, this is an Armalite rifle model 15. Would you like to try it? And I got to tell you, just about every woman that comes to this class or every beginner, they are a little bit trepidatious perhaps, but they get some coaching from us and they're safe and we're watching them and they press that trigger and they are just delighted. They are amazed and they are having such a good time because it is really super easy and fun to use, and it's just so handy, especially for those that might be new to guns or might not have that upper body strength. This is a really great option.
Yeah,
couldn't agree
my
more.
wife and both my daughters, they prefer the AR-15 as their home defense firearm for all the reasons you guys stated.
Yeah, it's amazing
Michael,
to see a person shoot an AR-15 for the first time. So I will actually show mine since Beth showed hers, and I'll add that AR-15s tend to come in one of two configurations, either a rifle configuration or a pistol configuration. So mine's actually a pistol configuration, so this is not a traditional buttstock. It's called a arm brace. But you see my barrel is actually fairly short. This is a 10.3-inch barrel. Very, very easy to use. This one's from Daniel Defense. I absolutely love it. If you were to purchase this in a rifle configuration, you have to have the barrel to be 16 inches or longer. Otherwise, you've got to file additional paperwork with the government, what's called Form 1 with the BAT, FE, pay a $200 fee, and unfortunately, wait 6 to 12 months. So your alternative is to buy the pistol configuration if you want a short barrel, or just go with at least a 16-inch barrel. So as I mentioned, some of the things we love about these guns are the endless accessories that we can add to it. In fact, I'll start back here. This is a little joint I have in the gun where I can fold the stock down for storage or for transport. It'll actually fit into a backpack. I've got a rear sight from Daniel Defense and a front sight from Daniel Defense, but this kind of boxy thing in the middle is actually a holographic red dot scope. So I don't have to use the iron sights. I can point this downrange, and that holographic red dot and ring seem to just float in space, and it's centered right over the target. I've also added a home defense light on here. This is called the Scout light from Surefire. So I think you'll be able to see the light go off. When I'm holding this in a normal grip and I just press that pressure plate there, it lights up the gun. I've also added some parts internally. I'll upgrade the trigger. I've upgraded a few additional things. So each time I think I'm done with the upgrades, I think of some new things. So it's kind of like the erector sets of guns. You guys ready to talk pros and cons?
Yeah, yep. We got to get into it.
All right, go. Joe, I'll have you pull up chart 15. Beth, I'll have you hit that first one.
Yeah, like I mentioned, it's lightweight. It's fairly easy to manage recoil and easy to control for most people.
Yep. Steve?
More ammunition. It carries, like you said, a 32 round magazine, and a couple magazines will, I'm sure, be plenty to be able to defend yourself in your home.
Yep, and reloading can be more rapid than reloading a shotgun, for example. And again, I'll hit that last pro there. The thing I love are the accessories. Building on it, changing it, I can modify it so a gun that doesn't necessarily fit a person Steve's size, I can change some things on it, hand it over to Steve, and he can fire it, and it fits him. So how about cons? Steve, you referred to something in the opening of this section talking about people who might live in different areas, urban areas, apartments, townhouses. What might be one of the cons associated with AR-15s?
Well, you remember our safety rules talk about know what your target is and what's around it and behind it in particular. So when you press a trigger on a firearm in an AR-15 in this particular case, we're hoping that we don't have somebody that's behind a 4-inch or a 6-inch wall. We don't want to take the chance that the rounds go through that. Now, the AR-15s, the ammunition is light and fast, and they tend to break up on the wall, but you also need to consider what might happen if it does go through the wall. Even if you don't share a wall with somebody in an apartment or condominium, even if you're in a residential neighborhood where your neighbors are, just feet away from your house, it's the same consideration. You have to be careful to make sure that you don't pass through the wall.
Yep, great thought. Beth, you want to take that next one?
Yeah, just thinking about it, really, it's the cost of all that customization, all those accessories that can really, really add up. And that's kind of a con for, I think, a lot of people. However, if you're just looking for kind of that bare bones basic, just get started kind of AR-15, you could probably get one between $500-$600. So
Yep,
just
and
something
I'd
to
say
think
that
about.
the accessories I've added would pay for another gun if I just shot a
Yeah.
stripped down rifle. And I'll hit this last con. Barrel length is going to be a consideration here as well. Now, Steve and I have both picked the pistol version of our AR, so we have a nice short barrel. But on the other hand, if someone invited us to the range and they wanted to hit targets at 300 yards, that short barrel is not perfect for that. So if you like competition at the range and you want to hit targets at those distances, you're going to have a longer barrel, and that's a consideration when it comes to weight and maneuverability. Anything to add, guys?
Nope.
Nope.
So let's go on
All
to
right.
handguns then. Michael, let's have a talk on handguns real quick.
Yep. So handguns are perfectly acceptable, very maneuverable. But I'd say one of the more important features that I talk about if I talk to new gun owners is in some cases a handgun might be the only gun they own if they've also got their concealed carry permit. So if a handgun is all they've got, well, then there's decisions been made, and that might be the best choice for a home defense firearm. Now, for me, my home defense pistol is different than the gun I carry. The gun I carry, well, it's pretty small. It's a Ruger LCP2. This is a full-size gun. I don't like to carry this on my side, but it's in a secured case like Beth described. When I get access to it, or my wife gets access to it, we've got a mounted light on it. I've got a large magazine in here, so I can pretty much count on being able to defend that home. I've got regular sights on that gun, but one of the newer things that's out recently is people are adding red dots to the top of their rail or the top of their slide. A lot of manufacturers ship guns with the proper screw holes in it so they can mount a red dot from companies like Vertex. But you can also buy plates from a company like Trijicon, where they sell you a plate that can slide in place of the rear sight. It gives you all the mounting holes to be able to mount a red dot, and suddenly you've got an easier ability to look at the sights when you wake up and your brain's a little bit foggy overnight. So why don't we do the same thing we did with the previous gun types and talk pros and cons?
Sounds
So
good.
Joe,
Michael,
I'll have you pull up chart 16. Yep, I'll start this out. And it refers back to something I already mentioned. If you're going to have one single gun and you also want to have a concealed carry permit, then this is going to be your choice. I can carry a handgun when I'm out of the house. I can also use that for home defense. I can't really carry a shotgun around in a holster very easily. So if I'm just starting out, a handgun would be the right choice. So Beth, you want to take that second one?
Yeah, that goes hand in hand with the idea that, hey, those pistols, revolvers, semi-autos, they're smaller. So in most cases, it's going to be easier to get them in a storage or a staging kind of setup. So that's definitely, especially with a confined space, that's going to be a plus. And you know what else? Honestly, thinking about this as a mom, as a parent who might need that one hand to, I don't know, grab a child or open a door or hold a flashlight, whatever the case may be, usually that handgun is going to be easier to shoot one-handed. So that's another pro I have to add.
Great point. I could probably shoot my AR-15 one-handed. I'm not going to try that with my shotgun. Steve, you want to hit that last one?
Yeah, let me talk about ammunition and the cost of it. One 9mm round is less than half the price of a AR-15 round, and maybe about 2/3 of the price of a shotgun round, or half if you're using double-aught buck. So it's a little bit cheaper, which would help you to be able to practice more shooting.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. In fact, when I'm at the range and my friends are shooting my AR-15, as they're just banging off rounds, I'm thinking, there goes a dollar, there goes a dollar, there goes a dollar. So I let them shoot my handguns more than my my AR-15. So how about if we talk about the cons? I'll hit that first one. A handgun, by its nature and by its caliber size, is typically going to have less stopping power than a shotgun or an AR-15. So this is a consideration if you've got more than one firearm, or you're considering buying more than one firearm. You may have one firearm for home defense and another for concealed carry. Beth, you want to take that second one?
Yeah, and as we all know very, very well, because of the shorter size, the smaller barrel, that can make that handgun a lot more difficult to control. So to be accurate, especially in that stress situation, that could potentially be a con.
Right.
Yeah, it could be. If I had my choice, I would prefer an AR or a shotgun. But when the rubber hits the road, I would use a handgun. Is more than capable of getting the job done for you. This leads us. Yep, this leads us into our third and final topic for the day. How does training for home defense differ from concealed carry in public? The questions that I would really like us to talk about is, how does training for home defense differ? Not only that, but discussion on clearing rooms versus sheltering in place. We've got these fundamentals of home defense, Beth, that we talk about in our defensive shooting fundamentals course. How we evade, we barricade, we arm, we communicate, and we respond. And then finally, how do we explain home defense rules, and how do we plan to have young children? How do we plan to have young children be involved with the older children in our practices? Let's start off with you, Michael.
Sure. So we talk a lot during our concealed carry and home defense courses and in the book that we stress that deadly force should be a last resort. We talked about this in part one. This should be a situation where we didn't start, we can't escape from, and we have no other choice. That escape part is really stressed. If you can escape from a violent situation, you should. But of course, in our homes, we might have less of an opportunity to retreat or escape. So, for example, we might be on the top floor and the bad guy has our escape route blocked, or the bad guy might have entered the room that we're already in, and the opportunity for escape is long gone. So those situations where you'll need to stand your ground and take advantage of things like cover, barricades, and the other conditions in your home, those things are going to have to be calculated into your home defense training plan.
These are all very awesome points that you make clearly in your book, Concealed Carry and Home Defense Fundamentals. We also have that defensive shooting fundamentals course that I just mentioned. And it offers some specifics on how individuals and families can think through and plan through defense during a home invasion. So, Beth, how about if you take us through the 5 fundamentals of home defense?
Yeah, sure thing, Steve. Now, Joe, I think we have a chart 17 that actually has these 5 fundamentals of home defense. So if you could put that up, that would be a great visual aid. Now, you'll see in this chart that these 5 points aren't in any kind of linear order. They're not one by one, next step kind of thing. And the reason is because they don't necessarily have a particular order. In fact, these steps could kind of overlap each other, or happen at the same time, or even jump over one another, just depending on the situation that you're involved with. And Steve, we've had such great success teaching these 5 fundamentals to our defensive shooting fundamentals classes. People are really learning from this. And again, it's 5 things, but let's take each one of them and kind of look at it more specifically. So the first one, again, as Steve said, was evade. And what this means, and this goes hand in hand with our CCHDF kind of mentality, that we want to get away, avoid, or escape if possible. So for evade, what we're going to do is get away, move to safety. Maybe this is where you're putting that home defense plan into place, and you have that safe room where you, a loved one, or whoever else might be in the household, they can get to. The next step would be barricade. And this could be different for different folks, again, based on what your capabilities are or what your home looks like. But this would be an idea of blocking that entry point in whatever means, whatever way it might be possible. For instance, maybe besides locking the door, you could move furniture in front of that door. You could, I don't know, somehow use any blocking device. Steve, what have you guys talked about in classes for barricade?
Anything, whatever you've got we talked about improvising, adapting, and overcoming. Wherever you are, whatever you have. In my house, I have this boat-shaped coat/shoe rack that can easily just be tipped down forward that stops that door from opening up.
Okay, so it could be books, it could be ropes, it could be furniture, it could be shoes. I mean, it literally could be anything just to put in front of that entry point. And with barricade, we're making sure that we're not just standing there right in front of where that door opens. We want to move off the line of attack. So we want to make sure that we've positioned ourselves in a way that if the bad guy does get through, we have an advantage of seeing that before he maybe sees us. Now, along with all of these, and again, it could be happening in any order, we want to arm ourselves. And hopefully that means you're going to your staged firearm, whatever that might be. We teach in these classes, of course, we teach about that handgun, but maybe it is that shotgun, maybe it is that AR-15. Also, communication is important. And what we mean by communication, it's not just calling 911. And here we are, Michael. That's the most important thing we could potentially do. And Michael has been a broken record, but that's important to repeat. The 911 is so valuable to save time. But it might also be communication with others in the house. We might have to call out to a loved one. We might have to talk to the intruder. It's very possible we might give those loud, bold commands to tell that person to stay away, or that we are armed, or that we have called police. And finally, the last of these 5 steps is respond, and we say respond as necessary. And Steve, as you know from the classes, does this mean we have to shoot an intruder? Does this mean we have to use the firearm?
No, that's our last resort always, right? So if we can't talk our way out of it or scare them away by just telling them that the police are on their way, if they do enter that room that you're barricaded in and that's your last option, that's when you do it.
And so there you go. Evade, barricade, arm, communicate, and respond as necessary. Not in order, but something you and your family can talk through. You can make this a very significant part of your home planning when you are not just using your mental exercises, but when you're actually practicing drills. You can go through this right now. And since all of us are pretty much stuck at home, what better time to go through these steps and really make sure that we've got it down.
Right. Beth, I want to ask you one question before we wrap up. You and I talked about this the other day. I think when people think about home defense, they think about advancing through their houses and clearing rooms. It's just one of the things they see on TVs. But you and I talked about this the other day. What's the one reason and the one reason only that you told me you would advance out of your safe place and head toward a bad guy as opposed to staying in that safe place and sheltering in place?
Whew, that actually gave me chills. The only reason I would advance on that is if the bad guy was between me and my children.
Right. Same for me. It's the only reason I would leave that safe zone. And if they are between me and my sons, I'm heading out that door and getting ready to stop them.
Yes.
Beth, Michael, we could talk about this all day, couldn't we?
Yeah.
Sure could.
We definitely could. And maybe we will, but not today. I want to say this. It's been an incredibly informative and educational 60 minutes once again. And for everybody that joined us, we are so glad that you did choose to join us. Our hope is that you take this information and share it with your loved ones and your friends and begin planning, preparing, and practicing for your home defense. Now remember, these training episodes can be found on our USCCA YouTube channel for playback at any time. So you can go back and listen to these discussions and start writing notes if you haven't already been doing that so that you can do your home defense plan and you can start your practice. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate you. Stay healthy, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Once again, Michael and Beth, thank you guys so much for your expertise and sharing it with our audience. Everybody, have a good night.